Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 270 of the Assorted Calibers podcast, the Second Amendment podcast that has a little bit for everyone. I am obviously not Weer'd. He's on vacation, and he picked a terrible time for one. So tonight, we are having an ACP Roundtable. Computer, activate emergency holographic co-hosts.
We are Dodd.
How are you doing today, David?
This half of Dodd is fine.
All right, you're maintaining kayfabe. Awesome. What about the other half of Dodd?
This is Oddball, and yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
Okay, what you drinking?
Actually, nothing right now. I should change that.
Oh, I just assumed since you were feeling good, you were partaking.
No, I was just finishing a can of Coke, and now I think I might go with some Baku 5-year-old rum.
Rum's always good. I'm having some Malibu rum flavored with strawberry.
Very nice.
So speaking of partaking, we have a friend of the show. She's contributed, but not very much, Connie Elliott, and she is currently partaking of a Vietnamese soup that I can't pronounce and won't even try. How are you doing tonight, Connie?
Doing okay, Erin, and it's Hing Chua sour soup. Just stick with sour soup.
As she
Yes,
said.
I looked up the recipe, and it looks very good.
Mm.
It's tasty.
Yes.
Want me to drop the link? Maybe Erin will include it in the show notes.
Oh, absolutely. I can do that.
Absolutely.
Right. So this has been a very busy week by the time you hear this, which is why I've convened this round table, because I just didn't think we could in good conscience miss this week. But just to ease us in, David and Oddball, you had some fun at a blog shoot recently. How about you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, the blog shoot was in my part of Tennessee, East Tennessee. I was one of the hosts of it. And it's a thing that we do every year. We try to get some, now it's less bloggers, more podcasters, but we try to get folks from wherever they're willing to travel in from to get together, talk guns, shoot guns, eat food, and just have a good time. And that was this past weekend, and one of our friends, actually a friend of show with common name, brought his machine gun and his whippet, which we got to play with.
Did you whip it
Oddball,
good?
We whipped it good. And Oddball shipped several things to my house in advance. One was some ammunition, so he didn't have to transport it. And the other one was a box of peeps, which we used on the range because we found out previously that peeps make fun targets.
And they're more biodegradable than clay pigeons.
Yes. We also actually, Panya bought a small watermelon, which we propped up at the end of the range, and she shot it, and it fell off the backstop and rolled towards her, and she shot it as it rolled towards her.
What did she shoot it with?
She has a Browning 1911 380. So imagine a 1911 that got put in the dryer and shrunk a bit.
Well, that sounds an awful lot like my Colt Mustang.
It's a bit larger than your Colt Mustang, I believe.
Yeah.
But yes. And when I bought it for her, I got the fancy deluxe one with the rosewood grips and the stainless slide, so it's all pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And her one complaint about it is every time she's taken it to the range, she's had to fight people off so that he can actually shoot her gun because everybody wants to try it out.
So how many?
It's a very adorable gun.
So how many shots did it take to kill the watermelon?
I think she grazed it on like her second or third shot.
Yeah, she grazed it on her. She hit it a couple times.
Yeah, but also keep in mind the light was failing.
Yeah,
it was after dinner, so We were shooting at dusk.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
And-
it sounds like the watermelon was performing a Tuller drill with her, and it kept advancing despite being shot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we propped it up again, and I took matters into my own hands with my new to me 44 Magnum Desert Eagle, and
But since we're shooting a watermelon, shouldn't it be a desert eagle?
Oh.
And I demonstrated the difference between concealment and cover, as it was hiding behind a brick.
Which, again, you owe me a brick.
Yes, the brick was not cover.
Yeah,
It was just
I
concealment.
mean, bricks are usually cover, but at higher calibers, they're just an inconvenience.
Yeah. The brick was returned to its component parts.
I seem to recall, well, multiple stories about Carlos Hathcock, the Vietnam-era Marine sniper. One of the things he liked to do, he actually got an armorer to rig up a Browning 50 cal, make it single shot, and mounted an optic on it. And so when he would go sniping, one of the things he would do, because the Viet Cong liked to use forked trees to use as toilets, sometimes the trunk of the tree was in the way, and because it was a 50 cal, he'd just shoot through the tree.
There you go.
So, yeah, with 50 cal, trees, cinder blocks, houses, they're more of an inconvenience than cover.
Yeah. And one of the folks that was there was actually a local friend that is fairly new to shooting. So of course,
You may have heard me refer to he and his wife as the kids.
So of course, Erin, as you're very well aware, when we go to the range at one of these shoots, there's a couple guns for people to try.
Couple.
And Steven looked at my selection and went, "Those two are different. I want to shoot those."
Okay,
And they were.
okay, so I'm guessing one of them was the Altor.
One of them was the Altor.
By the way, I showed the picture of the Altor to Tex, and and
Did he say, "Oh no"?
the thing is, okay, so I'm just typing at him over Discord. There was no face-to-face, there were no vocal tones, but somehow I was able to pick up in his typing his tone, and he went, "Ugh." It was a
That
shuddering.
is a reasonable reaction.
It was a
yes.
shuddering
Yes.
disgust.
The other one was the Thunderstruck.
That's the 2-barrel volley gun revolver.
Ah,
22
yes.
mag.
Yeah, 22 Magnum.
And Connie, I just put a picture of the Altor in the show notes so you can look at it and go, "What?"
Or rather, in
I'm
the chat.
saying,
Or in the chat, rather. In the chat.
oh my.
Yeah, it's special.
That is probably the politest reaction we've ever gotten.
I mean, really, the kindest way.
Not pretty.
The kindest way I can describe it is to say that it's a modern 9mm version of the Liberator pistol.
yes,
Closer to the Vietnam era deer gun, but it's the same concept.
Yeah.
close enough.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was thinking of it as the modern 9mm version of a Saturday Night Special.
I mean, it is
Saturday
basically a
Night
zip gun.
Special is better.
Yeah, I mean, if you go with the classic zip gun that was made from leftover plumbing components, it's probably closer.
Hmm.
My.
And then there's the Thunderstruck.
And unfortunately, Weird is not here to get the recording of his reaction, but that was actually the Thunderstruck was actually this gentleman's first experience with a revolver.
And how did that go?
Well, several times I heard him go, "But why?" when you were
Yes.
explaining one or the other. Because you kind of have to break most of the rules of safe gun handling to load or unload the Altor.
To load and fire the Altor, you have to at least partially pull the trigger 3 times.
Good boy.
And you have to place your hand around the barrel, at least 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
For a moment, I thought that it's kind of like, Hush Puppies, the shoes. They're just so retro ugly that they're cool, that this is the sort of thing you might get for that. But after hearing that description, I'm not even there anymore.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that I entitled it the alleged firearm.
So I'll go through the quick operation of the Altor since you're unaware of it. Since there are all of 2 moving parts to that gun, the push button safety and the trigger, to unlock the barrel, you pull the trigger back a little bit. That unlocks the barrel and allows you to twist it off the cam lugs and pull it off. At which point there's the bolt face with a little ridged bit that you slide the rim of the cartridge onto. And since the firing pin is protruding, you need to slightly pull the trigger back to allow the cartridge to get mounted onto the breech face, or onto the bolt face, rather. And then carefully lower the trigger, or release the trigger, and then put the barrel back on and twist it so that it is cammed and locked in place. And then you pull the trigger back until you can see in there that there's that little ramped piece of plastic behind the trigger. It will shove your finger off of the trigger, and the trigger and the firing pin will slam forward and slam into the primer of the round, and that's how it fires. It is a slam fire gun.
So
Open bolt, slam fire, single shot pistol.
Mm-hmm.
So Oddball, why is it that you felt the need to possess and fire this
Or to
craft of monstrosity?
Or to paraphrase Erin, why did you want this more than money?
Because it was $100 and there is something deeply innately wrong with me.
It is the most $100 gun I've ever seen.
Although, Oddball, as I've mentioned, if you pay basically the same amount for that threaded 6-inch barrel, I will allow you to put my suppressor on it.
I wouldn't do that to your suppressor. Oh, there's also the thing of, and I won't do it now because it takes entirely too long. At some point, you need to read the on their site their fact specifically about bullet tumbling
And rifling.
because it is legally rifled.
Micro grooves.
But about a quarter of the normal number of grooves.
Yeah, only
So-
4 of them
Legally or functionally?
legally. And according to them, tumbling is perfectly normal.
It's really one step above they drew the rifling on.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I put a link to the Altor fact in the show notes
Okay.
for anyone who wishes to be horrified even more.
It is.
Well, there's
Sorry, go ahead.
there's a really important question here, which is it fun to fire, Oddball?
Yes and no.
David is the person that has fired it the most besides me, and you're not going to go through a box of 50 rounds with that thing.
No. Number one, it would take too long.
You're going to at most go through a couple of them before you finally go, ow, okay, I'm done.
And Connie, just to put this in perspective, I'm left-handed. I will only ever shoot the Altor with my right hand.
Oh my.
I have no concerns about it blowing up, etc. But no, it's not particularly fun to shoot. It is purely it is a wonderful example of terribleness.
It's also a really good example of minimalist design.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's Nick Shabazz in his knife reviews where he talks about jackassery.
See, I'm not sure this is good for jackassery.
Oh my!
This is the equivalent of that Z Hunter folding knife he has.
Oh no!
There's a video on YouTube of two avid shooters, and they are given an Altor and a box of 50 rounds each. They are given no instructions. And there's a dueling tree out at the end of the range. And these videos are of them figuring out how to load and fire the Altor with the goal of get all of the plates on the dueling tree to the other guy's side first. It is a riot. I mean, these guys are laughing and saying ow and cursing the gun and teasing each other. It is one of the funniest gun videos I've seen. But did Steven actually ever fire the Altor, or did he look at it?
No, he did. He
okay.
After I demonstrated how it operated, he first went, maybe I don't want to shoot it.
I told
and then
you
went,
smart.
You know what? Okay, fine. I'll shoot it. Just like, okay. You don't have to, but
So he fired it once and said that okay, he's done that.
yeah. And
What happened to the Mae West line? I'll try anything twice.
The Altor is an exception for many, many people.
Yes, I've had true firearms enthusiasts shoot that and literally say, "Well, I've done that," and put it back on the bench.
I still think the best reaction was from the one friend who shot it once, put it down, looked at it, looked at you. No, bad oddball.
Yes.
The only thing missing was a spray bottle.
And like I said, the new shooter of the day, his first ever experience with a revolver was the Thunderstruck.
And I did put a picture of that further up the Discord chat.
Yeah, that's the Gen 3, which has a little bit longer barrel, but close enough.
But they'll still try to stuff it in the same box.
Yes. And then he got a chance to shoot my 6-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 617. So the K frame in 22.
The 10 shot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And he declared that his favorite firearm of the entire weekend.
Yeah, that was a significantly better experience.
Yes. The funny thing was after we did the whole range day, the next day we went out to Gatlinburg and stopped a couple places, including a gun shop, and they had a 4-inch 617 in the used case. And I pointed it out, had the guy take it out, and Steven liked that even better because it was less muzzle heavy. Mm-hmm. And he was quite tempted. I mean, the price was reasonable, $700 for a used 617, and it looked very gently used. However, he is just starting a new job, and his wife keeps a close eye on their finances because they just bought a house.
Yeah.
She, like our wives, she's small, but she's fierce.
Just starting a new job and just bought a house. That's not the time to make a purchase like that.
No. But as we're looking at it, I mentioned to him that pretty much the only way you find one of these in the used case at a gun shop is if somebody died.
Mm-hmm.
And the fellow on the other side of the counter said, "That's right. No one gets rid of these because they are just right." But he did fire all but one of the other available firearms.
I think you're correct.
And that one was because we advised him, "You're not ready."
Yeah, and that was the Desert Eagle.
Well, it sounds a lot like when I first met you for that very first blog shoot, however many years ago, when I basically said, okay, if you ask me if I want to shoot your gun, the answer is always yes. Just put it in front of me and I'll shoot it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I actually shared that anecdote with Steven. And he and his wife know who you are through Operation Blazing Sword.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I mentioned you, and there's this pause, and his wife looks at me and says, "Is that the same Erin from Operation Blazing Sword?" I'm like, yes.
Aw.
Yeah. So you got a little notoriety there.
Yeah. Well, the reason I haven't, I didn't go to that is next week I am flying out to Las Vegas because I've been invited there by the Liberal Gun Club for their national convention, and I'm going to be speaking. I'm not the keynote speaker. That's Annette Evans, but I'm the warm-up act.
Nice.
And so that's really cool. There may be some people saying, well, Erin, why didn't you mention this beforehand? And, well, it's because it's freaking expensive. I mean, the hotel rooms are something like $200 a night because it's Vegas.
Oh.
The only reason I'm able to go is because LGC is comping my hotel rooms, which is very nice of them. So I just have to worry about airfare. And I just figured, there are easier ways to see me. I mean, if you're already headed out to the convention, that's great. I'd love to see you, like David Phillips. He and his wife are headed out there. I'm looking forward to seeing them. But, I mean, please don't drop money on a Vegas hotel just to see me. You'll see me other places. But, yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And that's also why I didn't attend Gun Rights Policy Conference, because that was being held in Arizona. And I'm now at that age where I just can't handle cross-country trips that close to each other. And so...
And I just looked up Annette Evans, and I met her at the NRA Concealed Carry Expo a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. She's got...
Very nice lady.
She shoots competitively, Tiny Purple Demon. And she's got a couple of books and I think a podcast. So she's very accomplished. So just being, on the same stage with her is quite a big deal. But yeah, I think GRPC was like 2 weeks ago at this point, and yeah, flying across the country then back, then flying further and back will wear me out. I'm basically one cross country flight a month because I'm 50 years old now, and I just don't bounce back. So, this was the trip that I was budgeting for, and I couldn't go anywhere else. But
there are not enough spoons, especially traveling in today's messed up world.
Oh, Lord, yes.
Yeah. Yep. Well, before we get too far into today's messed up world, in addition to the blog shoot, one of the other things that was going on in my area this weekend was Smith & Wesson had their grand opening in Merville, Tennessee, and we weren't able to go because they put on tickets up for sale a couple of months ago with all the funds raised going to a charity, and I believe the tickets sold out in the first day. Imagine LibertyCon, but even more guns.
Oh, wow. So I noticed that it's written Maryville, but you pronounced it Merville.
That's because that is how it's pronounced.
Okay.
And
that's just Appalachia.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep. It's
I'm near a town that reads Sperryville on the map. It's Spurryville.
Yep. And Merville is in Blount County, which is spelled Blount, but it's Blount County. And don't you forget it.
So, David, I understand that something very interesting happened at the opening of this factory.
Yes. Well, I mean, a number of interesting things happened, but the one noteworthy was Jerry Miklek was there, and he is one of the Team Smith & Wesson shooters, and Jerry has a reputation for shooting a little on the fast side.
A bit.
Yeah, that's an understatement. I showed that video to my mother, the one, I don't remember how many years ago, but where he broke the record, and I told her, okay, now, Mom, it's going to sound like he's shooting a semi-automatic. He's shooting a revolver. And I had to show it to her twice before she could accept that that was actually a revolver. And he didn't just shoot 6 rounds. He reloaded and shot 12.
Yes.
And he did it in, I don't remember the amount of time, but it sounded like a machine gun, for crying out loud. And you're telling me that he broke that record?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it was the same record.
Not the same record.
Okay, but he did break a record, and that record was clearing a 6-plate rack twice, once with a 9mm semi-auto and once with a revolver. And with the semi-auto, it was 2.01 seconds. With the revolver, it was 1.88 seconds.
He's faster with the wheel gun. Of course he is. He practiced with it.
My goodness.
Yeah, so that's 6 shots on fairly small targets at speed.
And how old is Jerry at this point?
I believe he's late 60s. So he's obviously starting to slow down.
Oh, just a wee bit.
Clearly.
Yep. But everyone I've spoken to who has met him says that he is just the epitome of Southern gentleman.
Oh, yeah. I met him at my very first NRA convention before anyone knew who I was, and I was just sitting waiting for the shuttle bus, and I saw him, and he was wearing his shooting silks, and I didn't want to bother him, but I didn't know when I'd get a chance to see him again, and
exactly.
So it was like, hi, Mr. Mikulek, I just want to say, I'm a big fan, and I'm really impressed, And I think I did something lame, like, can you give me pointers on how to shoot? And he shook my hand, and he was so sweet. And, he gave me the fairly standard answer, but he acknowledged me. And it's like, just practice, just work on pulling that trigger faster. So
Senpai noticed you.
He did. So he's just an absolute sweetheart of a man.
Yeah, that's I've heard that from pretty much everybody. But it is exciting, and both Oddball and I made similar statements separately, and we both got in return pretty much the same look from our wives, which is that once the factory starts actually producing enough guns for retail sale, we will want a Smith & Wesson firearm that says Made in Tennessee.
Okay, so the look was from
awesome.
Your wives saying that.
We said that we want... when they're available, we want to buy one of the Made in Tennessee Smith & Wessons.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
The looks were a mixture of course you do, and we'll discuss it later.
Actually, that's not entirely correct. I got out, well, Panya, you know that once that there are now going to be Smith & Wessons that say made in Tennessee on the side of them, and she just said immediately, no. But no.
Yeah, you got a little bit faster and more clear response. I got the amused eye roll response with the we'll discuss it later.
Well, Oddball, the only answer here is to buy 2 and give 1 to her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just make sure she doesn't have a sock big enough to put it in, because then she might hit you with it. So that joke is a former girlfriend of mine many years ago, actually close to, I'm going to say it out loud, 30 years ago. I bought a case of 6,000 rounds of .22 ammunition. And my girlfriend at the time, as I'm slowly working my way through this, told me that if I bought any more .22 before that was mostly gone, she would put it in a sock and beat me with it.
And your
You
response?
made her point with emphasis.
Yes.
And your response was?
Yes, dear. And until I was down to about 1,000 rounds, I did not buy any more .22. Actually, I don't think I bought any more .22 even after the relationship ended, and I still had some left.
Wow.
I want to be erring on the side of caution.
She made an impression.
If I had bought more, she certainly would have made an impression. Now, what's also made an impression, if you don't mind me transitioning to the next topic,
Please.
is with the recent horror occurring in Israel, there's been a lot of people asking, well, I thought everybody in Israel had guns. the answer is no. You do
No.
see a lot of firearms on the streets, but those are all either active duty or semi-active militia. The average private citizen does not own a firearm. I believe one of the numbers that I read was that about 3% of Israelis own a personal firearm. And part of that is because the laws for purchasing a firearm in Israel would...
Well, as I phrased it, they make California or New York look unrestrained in comparison.
Yeah, even after the New York Permit Improvement Act, as they call it, it's still much more restrictive.
There's something like the Minister of the Interior had to authorize the withdrawal of personal weapons from Israeli state-owned arsenals or armories so that citizens could go get their firearms?
No.
No, that was for the militia arms.
So
Okay.
what I think you're thinking of
Thanks.
is that, okay, you have to renew your license periodically. I believe it's every 3 years, and
I believe so.
And part of the renewal is you have to pass a shooting test, and there may even be physical tests involved. It's long and complicated. And we'll get,
and if this link would actually load, I would.
and we'll get into the laws of Israeli firearm ownership in a moment. But the Minister of the Interior did a couple things. He basically told whatever bureaucracy that processes the firearm licenses to, get their act together and start processing them faster. Expedited the interview process because instead of having to come in person, they could do it over the telephone. He said that he doubled the amount of ammunition that a private citizen could hold. I tried to say hold and own at the same time. It previously was 50. You could only maintain 50 rounds of ammunition. Now, if you went to the shooting range and shot them, you could, of course, buy more, but you could just never own more than 50 rounds of ammunition for your singular firearm. He has since doubled that to 100, which is still a trip to the gun range for most Americans. But the thing that you're thinking of is that for the people who had to surrender their firearm because they were not able to renew their license, he's basically said you can go to the police station and pick them up. So it's basically a case of, well, yeah, we know your firearm license lapsed, but in the face of what's going on, we'll overlook that. We'll turn them over. Consider that your license is now renewed again. Go get your guns.
Survival is important.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
It is.
Yeah, well, this all dates back to the initial firearms law of 1949 in Israel. Unfortunately, every source I found for the Israeli firearms law of 1949 is in Hebrew.
But you should read Hebrew because you're Jewish, David.
No. I speak two languages, English and bad English.
When do you ever speak English, David?
Pardon?
When do you ever...
Translate.yandex.com.
Yeah, I tried running it through an online translator, and no, it didn't like it.
David, my joke was, well, when do you ever speak English?
I speak English good. I word well. So the requirements are rather extensive, as Erin said, and one of the mentions in this is from actually a law office in Israel. Even someone who served in a combat position in the IDF or had previously held a valid gun permit may fail to meet these requirements. However, someone who underwent combat IDF training for 7 months will have an advantage when applying. Doesn't mean they'll actually get it. So it's a person must be a citizen or permanent resident of Israel, lived in Israel for at least 3 years. If they complete their national military service, that's a bonus, but they don't have to. A person who served in the IDF can receive a firearms license in Israel at the age of 18, national service at 21, Someone who never served can only apply for their weapon license at the age of 27. The applicant must be fluent enough in Hebrew to understand instructions and pass an interview. They must have a health declaration from a physician, and they must undergo a weapons training and an interview.
There's also a psychiatric evaluation.
That's part of the interview process is a psychiatric.
Yeah.
And there are also limited reasons that you can. Now, again, all of this is for a handgun carry license. The long guns are even more restricted, which sounds kind of backwards, but primarily it's for defense. The desire to obtain a weapon for self-defense is not considered sufficient reason for obtaining a private firearms license. You have to meet one of several criteria specified in the procedures. Anyone who lives or works beyond the Green Line, the West Bank, or some of the communities entitled to weapons within the Green Line, serve in the security forces, police, Shin Bet, airport security, security guard, tour guide, certified farmer, explosives carrier, or shooting instructor. And as Erin mentioned, they only can have 50 rounds of ammunition. Hunters, rodent exterminators, athletes in the field of shooting, and veterinarians working in the field are entitled to receive a type of rifle appropriate to their profession, subject to the recommendation of the relevant authority.
You know, this kind of hits me hard as an American because, and as a Virginian, because the whole fight here, right? The Bill of Rights was written by Virginians. The whole reason we have a Second Amendment is because the British Governor General in 1775 tried to make off with all the powder so that the colonials could have their nice weapons, but not have any powder that would let them use said weapons. And a fellow named Patrick Henry, a young firebrand, went and gathered up a militia and stood in front of the governor's house in Williamsburg and around that magazine and said, "You may go, but the powder's staying." And the powder did stay. And that meant the colonists had the ability to resist, right? And they set out for us. Rights come from us, right? They're God-given, or they're innate, inherent in us. Right? Mm-hmm. But that law is written that rights come from the state, and people get it at the sufferance of the state.
Yes.
If that's the case, then they don't really have a right to life, do they? Except as the state suffers them to have that right, or the regime.
Yeah.
This also explains why civilian casualties in Israel are frequently so horrible, because because once an armed intruder makes it past the border, either through violence or through deception, they face soft targets with few weapons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, in contrast to that, in most parts of Israel, there will be on-duty or off-duty IDF soldiers, security forces, etc., who will have their firearms, but policy is those firearms are not loaded. They have ammunition, they have magazines, they're usually strapped to the side of the rifle or on in their belt pouch if it's a handgun. So they have that extra step of, all the jokes about
Israeli carry.
Yeah. This is one step further. Israeli carry is loaded magazine in the gun, no round chambered. This is not even a magazine in the gun.
What's the reasoning behind that, David?
The concern that someone would grab the gun and open fire.
Well, and beyond that, there's also it was developed early on in the creation of the modern Israeli nation, where
that was the Israeli carry, not the magazineless carry.
Right, the handgun for Israeli carry, where some of the handguns did not have the best safeties in the world, like the Beretta 1951 Brigadier with
that has a very good safety.
With the goofy bolt lock or side bolt safety on a
Crossbolt safety.
Crossbolt safety works great on a rifle. On a pistol, it's just kind of goofy, especially since if it's carried in on a strong side holster for someone who is right-handed, the bolt will be pushed out for safe. So it would be very easy for it to be pushed in and disengaging the safety.
It's
while
kind of like
in the holster.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Israeli military picked their handguns from the middle third of Oddball's collection. So it was just a hodgepodge mixture of revolvers and semi-autos, mostly semi-autos, from every country that they could get them from. So there was absolutely no standardization. So instead of having to train the soldiers on a particular firearm on how to manipulate the safety, it was just leave the chamber empty, draw, rack the slide, and fire.
Yeah.
It was easier and safer. The magazine-less carry was because of a concern that someone would get a hold of a soldier's gun and just start firing.
You could
because they're carrying these on public transport slung.
I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's logical or rational, but that was the fear.
Well, also remember that terrorism came into the modern world at the King David Hotel, right? This was part of taking the state of Israel. Yeah. So there was from a security perspective, there was a not unreasonable concern that there would either be retaliation or that their actions would serve as inspiration for somebody else.
Yeah. The King David Hotel was bombed in 1946. It wasn't a shooting terrorist action, but it was a bombing. And it's a kind of a black mark.
But the point of terror, I guess this is my area of study, is that the act is not only over the top, but is seen to be extreme. So, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing this like horror Olympics, right, playing out before us, as people are trying to see how horrible they can be toward their fellow man, or how horrible they can make the other guy seem to be, leaving us in this information fog.
So here's another thing that I don't understand, and I don't expect any of you will be able to answer it. It is mainly rhetorical. But, comparing and contrasting with the Ukrainian invasion of, 18 months ago? When the Russians invaded, Ukraine passed out something like 10,000 automatic rifles to citizens to help defend the capital of Kyiv. And when I say automatic rifle, I mean select fire, what our ATF would consider machine guns. And these were to regular citizens. Some of them may have been former military, but I remember a big deal being made about not all of them were. Whereas in Israel, I don't have the exact numbers, but the Jewish population, and I want to make that clear because Christians and Arabs and other people, they are not required to serve compulsory military service. But for
the most Orthodox generally don't.
They get a religious exemption. There are some exemptions, but by and large, the Jewish citizens, male and female, are conscripted for 3 years for men, 2 years for women. And admittedly, not all of them are infantry, but they do receive firearms training.
Absolutely everyone.
And so you would think, first of all, in a nation that is surrounded by other nations that have invaded multiple times and have made it no secret that they want them dead, that there would be a far more American gun ownership pattern. And you would also then think that in a situation like this, they would do like the Ukrainians did and pass out, battlefield weapons to people who have been trained to use them. And I don't understand why neither of these things happened. Again, I don't think you all can answer, but, any sort of speculation to help shed some light on this would be appropriate. I believe, David, you said something, it has to do with the fact that the State of Israel was founded by people who were already living there at the time as opposed to fleeing the Holocaust.
Not exactly, but close. Basically, when looking at the population of Jews in the world, they can be roughly and imperfectly divided into what are referred to as the shtetl Jews and the survivor Jews. The shtetl Jews are the ones who lived in the small Jewish communities beyond the pale of society in Eastern Europe. And many of them emigrated to the United States prior to the war. And their attitude towards government and government control was a certain way. Even though Eastern Europe was not a safe place for Jews, there was this belief that if the government didn't protect them from the Cossacks, then things would have been even worse. Even though the Cossacks often worked for the government. Never mind. The survivors were those who survived the Holocaust and had a very different impression of government control. The founders of Israel, the civil administrators, I guess, of that process, many of them were Jews who had fled Europe prior to the Holocaust, a number of whom wound up in the United States. The rank-and-file soldiers were much more often survivors or American soldiers of Jewish descent. So again, different attitude. And that was a lot of what for now. Again, this is an imperfect, not precise, but it's just a general idea so you can kind of see where this is coming from. And that formed a lot of these basic policies. Like I said, that the 1949, I believe it was, the Firearms Law of 1949, which was, we need to keep this under the control of the government because the people can't be trusted.
It's a very continental European kind of attitude. There are two things we look at in economics, especially in institutional economics. One is that culture matters, and clearly there is a sharp difference in Ukrainian Slavic culture and in the cultures of the Jews who remained in the Holy Land and of the returnees from the different migrations.
Yeah.
And that culture seems to be far more collectivist. And the second thing we say in public finance is that initial conditions matter. In fact, initial conditions determine the final outcome. And the initial condition set in the original firearms law is people can't be trusted with this. That's now baked itself into generations of bureaucratic culture.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, can you imagine these people trying to wrap their brains around, we got to get everybody armed in the middle of an emergency?
Yeah. And the
The
interesting
entire
thing is,
institutional structures to prevent that.
a lot of European Jews who make their way to America over the past 50 years, if they settle in the larger cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, they have that same attitude of, well, only the government can be trusted with firearms, even though that has never in history worked out well for the Jews where we weren't a majority. Never. Not once. Whereas the Jews who move to the United States and don't settle in the cities or move away from the cities tend to have more of my attitude towards, well, we can't trust someone else with our safety. And it's really interesting. I praised it that way intentionally because one of the tenets of the State of Israel is they can't trust anyone else with their security. But they expect their populace to trust someone else with their security.
And that's back to, if that's the case, then the people don't really have rights, do they? They have what's allowed them by the state.
They have permission.
That seems really backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it is, as you said, a very continental European attitude.
And quite frankly, I would go further than that in that the idea that your average Joe not only has the ability but should be allowed, quote unquote, to carry things like firearms, etc., for their own protection, is and has been for a good while now, for a couple generations now, a fairly uniquely American thing.
Yeah, there are a couple of Eastern European countries that kind of lean towards the same thing, but even Switzerland has moved away from that attitude.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even then, what everybody mentions the Swiss, and even then, for a very long time, it was, yes, you have your rifle in the closet, but you also have you are given this ammo and it's wax sealed, and you're in big doo-doo if that wax seal is broken, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. But with that, you have your rifle, you have your packet of emergency ammunition that you would use in an emergency to get to the disbursements point, but they're also encouraged to go to the range regularly where they are issued ammunition to shoot on the range, so they can keep their proficiency up.
Well, are they still? I know that they were, but I don't know if they are now.
I don't believe they are as much now. But one of the other articles I put in the show notes is actually from March of this year, when there was another significant attack in Israel. Yeah, so it was an attack in January that occurred, and I don't remember the total number of casualties, but it was the deadliest attack in Israel for a number of years. And there were attempts to loosen the Israeli gun laws at that time. And one of them was to speed up the issuing of gun permits from around 2,000 a month to 10,000 a month, reducing the wait time from 6 to 8 months to 2 to 3 months, and simplify the application process. Not all of that actually happened. Now, after this latest attack, there were actually some changes made to their gun laws. Our good friend Stephen Gutowski at The Reload put together an article on this, and it was some significant, sarcasm voice, some significant changes to the laws, one of which is, well, they don't have to come in for the interview. They can now do that over the phone. And the other one, as Erin mentioned, was increasing the amount of ammunition allowed to be owned from 50 to 100 rounds.
Well, I mentioned the phone interview too, but who's counting?
Oh, I missed that, sorry.
Can I go back a little bit? Because
Sure.
there's something else here that really strikes me as I listen to this. I remember reading an article, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago about multinationals trying to understand how to do business with a multinational staff. And I think it was IBM sometime in the 60s or 70s hired a professor out of a Dutch university to do a comparison of their workers from different nationalities. And one of the things he found was that Americans were the most risk-tolerant people in the world by far.
Huh.
That dates back to our founding.
Yeah, well, not just that, but we were the new world. We were the frontier. People either had to take the risk to come here in order to survive the 30 Years' Wars, which were really horrible if you were a European peasant, right? Or they came because there was a chance. And it's something like less than 10%, possibly less than 5% of the population globally is really risk tolerant, let alone risk loving.
I mean, there's a reason that the sport of base jumping was invented in the United States.
Yeah, right. And there was a reason we had all these frontiersmen.
We had a lot of frontiers.
We had a lot of frontiers, and to be out there, not only could you get isolation, but you had the opportunity to be responsible for your own life, to have ownership of your own life.
It was an absolute. Is if you were not responsible, you died.
Exactly. But it meant you had land, you had ownership of something real, right? Something that Europeans weren't allowed. Yeah, real estate is called that for a reason. And like evidently, there aren't other cultures in the world that are even close to that metric on risk tolerance. And some of the least risk tolerant cultures on Earth are from the European continent. I think Greeks were one of them, I recall. But like everybody, it's almost like we selected a population and siphoned all the risk tolerance out of the rest of the world. And
well, think about it, is to get here in the first place, that was a major risk. You got to risk an ocean voyage that you might not survive.
Yep.
And everyone was telling you if you took this ocean voyage, you're likely to die. So the people who actually were willing to do that are already fairly risk tolerant.
And you would never see the people you knew before again.
Yeah, almost certainly you would never see your childhood home, your family, your friends. This is a one-way trip, and you're in for the long run, or you're dead.
Right. So I'm thinking that we're seeing that difference in risk tolerance right there, because we're really the only country ever made for a risk-tolerant people.
Yep. And I know a lot of immigrants, and I've worked with a lot of immigrants to the United States over the years, and to a degree, we are still filtering for risk tolerance.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And, you know, when people come here and they're waiting for their green cards, right, they're on probation or they're waiting for their visas on their way to the green cards, we're so backlogged, it could be 4, 5, 7, 10 years before people can see their families again or go back to their childhood homes. It is not a small journey.
Yep. And speaking as we were of Virginians earlier, this is perfectly exemplified by Thomas Jefferson with the quote that's generally translated as, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery."
Yes.
That is the American attitude kind of in a nutshell. Well, not all Americans, obviously, but a significant number.
Or back to Patrick Henry, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be bought at the price of chains and slavery?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that attitude is actually starting to show up more in Israel with the gun rights movement. That's existed there basically for at least a generation, but was small and poorly funded and derided. But after the last couple of years, and especially after this past week, they've gotten a lot more attention and a lot more support. And there's a quote from Yoel Israel, the CEO of a digital marketing agency. "Who has a gun? The terrorists and all the criminals. Who doesn't? Law-abiding taxpayers. The government trusts criminals with guns more than their own citizens." Sound familiar to anybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he went on to say, "We all wish that our Israeli government could be there to protect us, but they cannot. We relearned that again this past weekend. Imagine if 1 of every 3 adult civilians near the border were armed. There would potentially be no rapes, no kidnappings, and a much lower murder rate." Yeah. Again, this is not anything surprising to anyone in the American gun culture. We've been saying the same things. And I honor and support my well, I mean, they're all cousins at some remove who are now at this late date trying to achieve some more independence and freedom.
But, it's still the fundamental question. Who chooses for you? Who chooses for me? And it's, even though Israel exists to protect the Jewish people, It strikes me that the only country ever to answer that question is I do. I choose for me. You choose for you. Is the United States.
Yep.
And we're having to fight to make certain, not kinetically, pray God, never.
Yeah.
But
it is
we're
a
still
constant
having
struggle to maintain that.
Yeah, but maintain. I think we have to claw some of it back.
We have been, thankfully. We'll get to some of those in later links, I'm pretty sure. But one of the things, another part of his quote, I support the citizen and the individual over government elitists. I care about human rights and people's lives. Guns are the great equalizer. Sam Colt smiles. Why is my wife afraid, and why keep only a golf club near my bed? It doesn't make sense.
He's right.
Yeah, but this is now becoming a more common refrain from the average Israeli citizen in light of what's just happened. And it's tragic that it's taken this type of destruction.
It's horrid that it's taken this barbarity.
And I think that this is starting to act as a wake-up call to those at the levers of power in government. One of the things that I've regularly said as a Jew is, without the means and determination to apply effective defensive force, never again is just a catchy slogan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, you're not the only one to feel that way, because there is a growth of interest in private firearms ownership.
Yes. I mean, it's been growing in spurts and fits. English is hard.
I don't know. It fit. It sounded Yiddish. I liked it.
Okay. But it has been growing in little bit by little bit over the past couple of decades at least. But this latest incident gave it a real big kick in the ass, to the point that the government is actually starting to listen to the people, which is not something that they're required to do so much in Israel.
But didn't someone in one of these articles start a petition in order to get increased firearm ownership, and got something like 22,000 signatures, which...
There have been several petitions, actually.
My point being is that in a small nation like Israel, 22,000 is really significant.
Yes. For example, one of them was... what's the name of the group? The grassroots organization in Israel, and I don't see the name of it, but on Sunday, they've drawn an additional 4,000 members in the 24 hours of starting on Sunday. The online petition he created in order to press the government on the issue gathered 8,000 signatures, and there was another one. A permit to carry a private weapon for anyone who has served in the IDF and has no criminal record got 22,000 signatures on Sunday.
Yeah.
And just to put things in perspective, Israel is about the size and population of New Jersey.
What exit?
All of them. All of them. Well, there's about 9 million people in Israel, and the square miles about the same.
I know. I just needed to make that joke.
Of course. Sorry, Oddball.
And I just thought of, you were asking why the difference between the Ukrainian reaction and the Israeli reaction. There's also the fact that the Israelis have a long-established, very effective military.
Yes.
The Ukrainians didn't. The Ukrainians basically didn't have a military when the Russians decided to annex Crimea.
It wasn't like 2015 that the Ukrainians really started to look into forming an actual professional military?
Yes, which was
right after Crimea.
Right after Crimea. So, honestly, handing out weapons to the populace and saying, yes, you can carry, was very much a last-ditch desperation action on their part.
And since Israel has been living with, to some degree or another, this type of thing since 1948, there's less of a feeling of desperation.
Right.
Yeah, arming the populace is what you do when, the Mongol hordes are invading and there's just nothing left.
Well, there are 2 times when you arm the general populace. The first time is you do it well before any need, aka the American system. And the other one is what we're seeing in Ukraine, where the Mongols are at the gates and you need every warm body who can hold a spear.
Heck, they're through the gates.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
There's not a lot left of the Ukrainian army at this point.
No.
Not informed units. They've been scattered and their communications have been disrupted, would be putting it kindly.
Although, from what I've seen, they are actually retaking ground at this point.
Yes, they're reforming units. They're retaking ground. Their higher ranking officer corps was pretty devastated in the early days of the combat. Mm-hmm. But they have an almost American ingenuity with just coming up with bizarre ideas that work. Mm-hmm. Like the 3D printed fins for anti-tank grenades to make them into drone droppable weapons.
Yes.
I feel like we're getting a little into the weeds here, and I want to wrest this back on topic.
Yeah.
But
so anyway.
Okay. So you mentioned that there were 2 times to arm the populace, and one of them was when the barbarians were past the gates. And I have to ask if that isn't the point right now, because the death toll of Israelis is somewhere around 1,000, if not more.
The last number I heard was over 1,200.
I wasn't sure if that was counting Palestinian casualties from Gaza strikes, but we're not going to talk about politics. We're talking about gun rights. And this
is as they're recovering more bodies from the ruins where the attack came from.
Okay. But another thing that I want to point out here is the death toll from the Tribe of Noba music festival, which is happening in the desert, and it was quite ironically a peace festival. And the last time I checked, it was 260 people dead. It may very well be more because, as you said, they are finding more bodies. And
last one I heard from the festival was close to 800.
No, not just the festival.
I might have misread that, but that was what I thought I read.
It was my understanding that it was about 260. By the time I wrote my article last night, it was 260 bodies found at the festival, but 800 casualties overall, which has since grown. But the point I'm trying to make here is that someone pointed out, Jay Peterson, a friend of mine on Facebook, said that if this music festival, just this, not the attacks on the kibbutzes or anything else, just the shooting attack on the music festival happened in the U.S., it would be more deadly than all of the mass shooting events we've had from Columbine up until now combined. It is that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With all of the fatalities, I'm just trying to find where I got that number. Okay, no, that was total. But with all the fatalities, if it is the 1,200 number that I saw, if it was scaled up to America, 330 odd million, then it would be close over 35,000 would be the equivalent.
And we only had like 3,000 people dead from 9/11, and we went to war for 20 years over that.
Yeah. Yep. And that's one of the not getting into politics. Sorry.
But even in the face of all this horror, we do have some good news, because there are heroes who saved lives. Many of them at the expense of their own lives, but many of them lived. And I think it was you who brought this up, David?
Yes. It's one of those things it's always important to look for the helpers in these horror events. It's very easy to fixate on the death and destruction and get a sense of hopelessness. But then reading about people who put their own lives at risk and in a number of cases lost their lives. One of them was I don't know what the Israeli equivalent of Uber is, but Yaniv Sarundi, who had dropped people off at the festival. He saw Hamas overrun an outpost and drove back through the gunfire, packed 9 people into his car, and got them to an Israeli safe place before dying of wounds that he received in the travel.
Well, I mean, let's not leave out the fact that he drove them to an IDF base, but that base was under Hamas control, and so he kept driving despite having been shot. So he didn't just take them to one safe space. He took them to a safe space, discovered it wasn't safe, and then took them somewhere else. And he waited with them and they were injured. He waited with them 2 hours until special forces arrived.
Yep, by which time it was too late to save him.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is Amit Man, she was 21 years old. She was a paramedic. And during the attack, she spent 6 hours helping wounded where she could, hiding from the Hamas forces, texting her family that she didn't think she was going to survive. And the last message they received from her was, "They're on me, they shot my legs." And her body was found later during the recovery. Mm-hmm. And her body was found with 107 others, approximately 10% of the farming village, elderly, infants, and mothers with small children.
Dear God.
Itay and Hadar Berdashevsky, with their 10-month-old twins, were 2 miles east of Gaza. When they saw the Hamas forces approaching the house, they hid the babies, and with whatever they could find to use as weapons, they fought the terrorists and were killed. But 12 hours later, the babies were found by Israeli forces and brought to their grandmother.
Now, my favorite here is Elkanah Federman, who was at that Tribe of Nova music festival.
Yep.
And he, unarmed, charged the terrorists and managed to grab a rifle from a security guard that had been shot. I don't know, shot dead or shot wounded.
Right.
But took a rifle and started firing back. And so he hit them. We don't know how many. All the reports say is a fair number. But he managed to inflict casualties on them, which drove some of them back. And that, of course, saved lives. And good for him. And he lived, which is also great. Yes. I don't want to diminish his successes in any way because that's phenomenal, but I keep going back to if only he had been allowed to be armed, if the other people would have been allowed to have been armed, it would have been a much different fight.
Yes. And one of the others is Jonathan Steinberg, colonel, commander of the Nahal Brigade of the IDF, who died in the fighting during an encounter with the terrorists. And the list goes on and on. One of them was Goad Akam Amar, who was a Druze soldier in the IDF. So for the folks who are saying that it's an apartheid state, no. But he was injured in the fighting and succumbed to his injuries.
You want to talk about people who've been bruised have been put down.
They're like the Polish of the Mideast.
So who are the Druze?
How do you describe the Druze? They don't even just describe themselves. But they are according to who you ask, if you ask a traditional Muslim, they are a heretical sect of apostates. Mm-hmm. If you ask a devout Christian, they are a bizarre sect of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And they have aspects of both. And I am apologize to anyone who is more knowledgeable about this than I am, because I'm just trying to pull little pieces I've learned over the years. But they are a long-suffering people. They have basically whatever religion is in charge in their area of the Mideast, they stomp them into the mud. With the exception of one group. Anybody want to guess?
No idea.
One people did not treat the Druze as slaves or victims.
Who?
The
The
Israelis.
Shiites.
No, oddball. No, the Israelis. There
No,
are
the
Druze in the
Israelis.
Knesset. There are Druze in the IDF. There are Druze running and owning businesses in Israel. It's Israel is in many respects, in this way anyway, very analogous to the American melting pot.
Yeah.
The only restriction, if you can call it that, to advancement in Israeli society generally seems to be you have to know enough Hebrew to do these things.
I mean, that makes sense because that's their national language.
Right. And considering the number of peoples who have made their way to Israel from all over the world, if they tried to maintain every language, that would be a little bit more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But
You couldn't do it.
yeah, and here's another one was Lieutenant Colonel Alim Abdallah, also Druze. He was the deputy commander of the 300th Brigade and was killed when confronting terrorists who infiltrated Israel from Lebanon.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'm thinking, that sounds like a very Muslim name.
Yeah, it's like I said, the Druze are a very unique people with a long history.
It's like this weird syncretic monotheism because
Yeah.
they recognize all kinds of people as saints. Like,
Yeah, they're ethnically Arabic.
mhm.
The religion is kind of they went to the religion buffet and took a little bit of
That's-
everything. Sorry, was that Connie?
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, because the religion is referred to as Abrahamic, so Abraham, monotheistic, syncretic, which I don't know how they mean in this context, and ethnic, the unity of God and belief in reincarnation and eternity of the soul. They do not proselytize, and in fact, they discourage conversion. And one of the tenets that has been mentioned, and I don't know how accurate this is anymore, is that a Druze living in another culture they don't have to follow like the dietary rules if that's necessary to get by in the country where they live. But yeah, it is just really interesting. I mean, there are probably college courses just on the history of the Druze.
I'm seeing some parallels to Sikhism, which is kind of a fusion between, well, I don't know if fusion is the right word, but it was founded from people who were following a particular man whose name escapes me at the moment, but some of them were Muslim and some of them were Hindu. And on his deathbed, he said, there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, there is only the Sikh. And I'm seeing some parallels. In this case, it's between the three different Abrahamic religions and, just put them all in a big mixing pot and make gumbo.
Kinda.
More or less. Yeah. According to the Wikipedia article, there are maybe 1 million Druze worldwide. So they're not a numerous people, but they tend to excel wherever they go. They work hard. They are loyal to family and friends. They are very admirable in many ways.
Sounds like great neighbors to have.
Yeah, pretty much. But there are a number of them who have reached relatively high rank in the Israeli military, and unfortunately there's now one less. But his name will be remembered.
All right.
All right, so
Yeah, I think
we should probably move on to anything else.
Yeah, we've got some better news here, and hey, this is about knives. I have no idea who added these, but
Weird.
from vacation. Well done, Weird. But Oddball, since you are our resident knife guy, do you want to take a stab at these?
I see what you did there. Yes, I will. So we've got a couple things from the lovely folks at kniferights.org, and again, these are folks that do a lot of work with not a whole lot of money legally speaking. So if you have some money, I always recommend kicking some their way. The first is that they have filed a motion for summary judgment in a lawsuit that they are involved in in an attempt to get the Federal Switchblade Act ruled unconstitutional.
Nice.
So there is actually a federal law that makes it illegal to import cross state lines for commercial reasons and a few other things. Switchblades being automatic knives or gravity knives, which honestly in the past decade or so has been largely ignored that it's been on the books, since you can go to Blade Show and they have a butterfly knife opening and closing contest to tricking contest, like, you know, similar to how folks have yo-yo contests.
I mean, I have an out the front opener, which I don't know. It's not exactly a switchblade, but it's an assisted opener. It's not exactly a gravity knife, but
Well, and I have a couple clicky-clacky automatic knives on my desk right now, not to mention a butterfly knife that they were not made in Tennessee.
So either I misunderstand something, or this law was mostly ignored in a lot of places, because you said there was a federal ban on these.
Correct.
Then how do we own them?
As I said, for the most part, in the past decade or so, it's similar to, well, gee, there's a federal law against smoking pot.
Okay.
But, so, you know, I would love to see this law stricken from the books. It's a completely ridiculous law. And the knife rights folks have actually been going after similar anti-knife laws, using Second Amendment arguments and recently using the Nyserpa versus Bruin argument, because, well, a knife is most definitely an arm if you decide to use it as such. It is one of the oldest arms, right? And of
Not
course,
long after the Rock.
one of the interesting bits of the Switchblade Act is the fact that it's what bans ballistic knives.
And what are ballistic knives again?
Ballistic knives are knives where there is a charge, be it compressed gas, explosive, whatever, that actually makes the blade fly off of the handle and towards your target.
Oh, the Spetsnaz bayonet that you could use to kill someone at range, because it used like a 22 blank.
Right.
Okay.
And which honestly is a nifty party trick, but not particularly useful. But that's the law that bans that, and it would. So I hope that the law goes away, and if it does, it'll be interesting to see if ballistic knives start showing up on shelves. So that's one of the lawsuits that they're involved in. The other one that I posted is, I know I covered it a while ago, that in Hawaii, and actually talking about gravity knives and Nyserpa versus Bruin, in Hawaii, they had a ban on butterfly knives, which a district court recently found to be unconstitutional. And the state went to appeal it, and the 3-judge appellate panel said, nope, it's unconstitutional. So There is, I believe the state has filed to get an en banc hearing, and 17 state attorney generals have filed amicus briefings in support of having that ruling overturned.
Is Tennessee by any chance amongst them?
It is not. Although I will say for Xander that Michigan is one. And one of the interesting things that the knife rights folks point out, that of those 17 states, 10 of them, it's perfectly legal to carry butterfly knives in their states.
So this won't affect those states at the state level,
right?
But they're in it anyway,
right? Oh, and for Weird, Massachusetts, your AG is also in support of the state's ability to ban butterfly knives. Although I guess that's not terribly surprising.
No, I thought you were going to go the other way, and I was going to be all shocked, but no.
No.
Went the way I thought it would.
So and there's not a whole lot to comment on those. Those are fairly both of those cases I think are pretty straightforward. And like I said, I'm glad to see that folks are applying the Second Amendment to things other than firearms. I know we still have a ton of work to do with firearms, but firearms are not the only arms.
Yeah.
Out there.
So speaking
and Knife Rights is doing great work.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of en banc, you also, Oddball, had a bit of an issue with how Weird and I tackled the Ninth Circus hijinks regarding the magazine ban. And since you're already talking here, let's just go ahead and do that. So what did we get wrong, darling?
Okay. And up front, I'm going to say that you two not having done deep dives on it and not having done a deep dive on how the Ninth Circuit works, I don't blame you at all. And this is one of those things where I have to preface everything I say with, I am not a lawyer. I am most certainly not a lawyer in the Ninth Circuit, so I may be getting stuff horribly wrong. Mark Smith at the Four Boxes Diner has done a couple videos breaking down what he thinks is going on, and what he said has made a lot of sense, and filled in some blanks for me, which is, of course, if you're unaware of what's going on with Duncan versus Bonta, that is a case dealing with California's high-capacity magazine ban, and it's gone pretty much all the way up to the Supreme Court once, but the NYSERPA versus Bruin ruling happened in the middle of all that, so SCOTUS said, yeah, the landscape has changed. Hey, Ninth Circuit, try it again with directions of check out this decision we just handed down. And then the Ninth Circuit went, oh, well, we'll just delay this further by throwing it all the way back down to Benitez, who has already agreed with SCOTUS. So, but we'll make him have to deal with the trial all over again. And of course, Benitez said, yeah, it's still unconstitutional. And he put in a 10-day stay on his order in order to give the state a chance to appeal and get that all set up, because he knew that the state was going to appeal. And
the state didn't want a Freedom Week while they were appealing.
Right. And as annoying as it is, I think that was the right way to go, just to avoid that confusion. And this is where you have to dig into how the procedures of the appellate courts work, and how the Ninth in particular works. So one that's very important to know is en banc in most of the other most of the other circuits means you're in front of the entire appellate, all of the appellate court judges. The Ninth Circuit has 29 of them. So instead of trying to get all 29 of them in one room at the same time, and then have the hearings in front of 29 people, instead they select 11 judges per case. And obviously the majority of the 11 judges that heard the en banc case before were anti-gun and said, no, we think any restriction on firearms is perfectly fine. We don't care what the Second Amendment says. So that's important to remember. With Benitez's stay, the next step, the logical next step is for the state to file the appeal, at which point 3 appellate judges that are kind of on call for that period of time, be it a week or whatever, I don't know exactly what the time frame is. They look at the case and go, okay, does there need to be an injunction put in place? Do we need to do anything before the 3-judge panel gets to be able to do things? And that's obviously on a rotation. And one thing that was interesting that Mark at Four Boxes Diner pointed out is that rotation of judges used to be announced on the Ninth Circuit's website. At some point, they stopped doing that. But obviously, the appellate judges know who those folks are. It's his thought, and I have to agree with him, that the 11 judges that were on that en banc panel looked at the 3 judges that were on call and went, oh, those are folks that are probably going to go along with Benitez's ruling, and we're at least going to have another Freedom Week because Benitez gave 10 days.
For them to cry in their beer.
Right. So those 11 judges did something that was kind of weaselly and that they really have never done before and may or may not be against the rules of how that the Ninth works, which is they declared, oh, well, this was this was a case that we'd already been dealing with, so we're going to just go ahead and take it back so that we don't have to worry about those 3 judges going, yes, it's unconstitutional, and us having to deal with the mess of, well, Californians can buy high-capacity magazines until we rule and say, no, they can't. So they snatched it from those 3 judges and completely skipped the 3-judge panel and went straight to that 11-person en banc. And that also means that they know that they've got those 11 judges again, instead of going back to the pool and getting another random draw of 11 judges, which may or may not agree with them.
Okay, so they've got the same pool of 11 judges, so of course they're going to rule that the magazine ban is constitutional. And so, again, it's going to go back to the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't that I was saying that you guys are wrong that it's not going to go back to the Supreme Court. It's that it's explaining why the en banc panel is doing this.
Okay, so it's a power play and virtue signaling because, well, they should know, and if they don't know, they're delusional, that, if they rule against it, then it's going to go back to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS is probably going to say, they're going to point at Bruin and say, did we stutter?
Oh, yeah, and I'm hoping that's the case. And I have no reason to believe it's not the case, other than the fact that SCOTUS has in the past had a, they've had a record of we're going to take up Heller and then ignore that issue for a while, and then take up McDonald and then ignore the issue for a few years. But in this case, I think they've miscalculated, because there are Supreme Court justices that, as you've talked about, that have written for other cases that, yes, we are watching you and we're expecting you to behave.
I get the feeling that Judge Thomas is cutting a switch as we speak.
Oh, if only.
I would love to see the hit him jump up on the bench, rip his shirt off, and scream out, "Shall not be infringed." That would be beautiful. But yeah, that was my thing with that. I just thought I'd fill in those blanks for you guys.
Okay, so we didn't get it wrong. You're just giving us more context and detail.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And there was one. Oh, right. There was one other case out of the fifth that has seen a fairly important thing happen, which is in the Fifth Circuit, and I believe it was an appellate court.
So this is about the forced reset trigger by Rare Breed, right?
Correct.
And so a forced reset trigger, as I understand it, is essentially the same principle as a bump stock. It just uses the trigger assembly instead of the stock.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, is this the same company? And it may very well not be, because I may be crossing my wires here, but there was one company that made a trigger and it realized that the ATF was going to take exception with it. And they basically, they had a lawyer on board, and the lawyer was a former ATF agent, and their company headquarters was the lawyer's office. And so the moment the ATF showed up, the lawyer was like, well, billing starts now, cracked his knuckles. Is that this company, or am I thinking of something else?
I think it is. I could be wrong, but I think it is.
Okay.
But a preliminary injunction has been put in place, saying that the ATF is not allowed to enforce their rule banning forced reset triggers. And one of the very important things that I saw in in the decision to hand down the preliminary injunction was that the judge pointed out that both parties, both Rare Breed and the government, acknowledge that one action of the trigger equals one shot, and that the argument is over trigger finger pull, which the judge points out correctly, and this is something that David and I got into an argument over, because I was seeing that argument, is that the law specifies action of the trigger. It says nothing about finger pull, and that is something that the ATF injected in their interpretation of the law in their rules, which in most cases seems innocuous, but in this case is the difference between a semi-auto rifle and full auto.
Mm-hmm. So what I muttered there was Chevron deference must be destroyed.
That's
yes.
True.
Yeah.
But mechanically, it does not fit the definition of full auto in the law.
Correct, and that's what the judge said. Right. Like I just said, the law refers to a single action of the trigger.
Right, which is what has been my contention since it was first released.
Yeah. So that is very good news on that front, and shows that that judge is most likely going to rule for rare breed, and we're going to get forced reset triggers back. And if that's the case, I would think it would be fairly trivial to fight a case against the bump stock ban.
Well, didn't the judge who issued the injunction, and who I presume is going to be presiding, whatever, over this case, basically say, from the looks of things, it really looks like Rare Breed is going to win just on the merits?
Yes, that's part of issuing a preliminary injunction, is that the party has a high likelihood of winning on the merits of the case. And by the way, this is Judge O'Connell in Texas, who is very much a pro-Second Amendment guy. He's
on the right side of the river.
I don't understand. Is that a joke, a reference?
O'Connell from The Mummy.
Oh!
The 1999 masterpiece with Brendan Fraser.
and what's her name?
Rachel Weisz.
Thank you.
Yeah. And O'Connell has some of his rulings and statements are right up there with Benitez on, you just decided to take the ATF over the barrel on this one.
Take him out to the woodshed.
Yep.
Yeah, apparently the ATF has been just catching grief left and right, and I cannot bring myself to find any kind of sympathy for them. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is oh no, that's the consequences of my very own actions.
Yep.
Connie, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add? Have we been talking over you?
Sorry, I've been slurping soup in the background.
Okay.
That's fine.
Understandable.
I just didn't... It took me a while, and I realized I haven't heard from Connie in a while. Didn't want you to be stepped on.
You guys are covering the subject really well.
Okay.
And I'm 100% with you on Chevron deference.
Okay.
With this, this is all at the forefront of establishing some kind of limit on what the administrative state, this self-appointed regime, can do to us.
Mm-hmm.
And my hat's off to you
and
for fighting it.
And it's the unfortunate thing of at some point, somebody does have to figure out what the stuff that Congress writes means, and sometimes that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But there's a difference between, okay, this is what I think they meant, and no, we're just going to start making stuff up as we go.
They look at the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, out of New York. Here's a list of things you can't do. Okay, so here's the list of things we're going to do.
Odd congruence.
You can't make the entire island of Manhattan a sensitive location.
I mean, didn't Judge Thomas basically say that nearly verbatim?
Yes.
Yes.
And then New York made basically the entirety of Manhattan a sensitive place. Then they scaled it back to it was only several square miles out of the middle of Manhattan Island, centered on Times Square.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Well, and there's also the thing of the with the ATF going, yes, we know we said that this was perfectly legal last week in an official official letter with a nice header and everything, but that doesn't actually mean anything.
It's just an opinion, man.
Just remember, the foundations of the modern administrative state were laid by Woodrow Wilson, right? And Woodrow Wilson was progressive. And progressive, according to my friend, or progressivism, according to my friend Charles Tipps, who did this whole series on Quora researching it. It was really good. Progressivism was Bismarck's social democracy, with some lipstick
put on it and a little bit of Fabian socialism tacked to it, imported into the United States by Rockefeller. So the big push behind the administrative state, the entire structure is set up to change us from a nation where we have our rights inherently to a Hegelian state, which is one where the state is God on earth and it grants us peons' rights because we're just its chattels.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of anchors back to some of our discussions about the structure of Israeli government.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? So, yeah, again, this is all about fighting the question, who chooses for me and who chooses for you, why? And the answer should be, I choose for me and you choose for you, and we can set up to do that responsibly. And all of these progressive intrusions are about driving us away from that through a dialectical conversation.
Your right to swing your fist ends at my nose.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. But, tell me who understands that part of American citizenship anymore and how many of them work in government?
I would say the further from cities you get, the larger that number grows.
Yes.
And the closer you get to DC, the smaller that number grows.
There's been an enormous change in the DC suburbs from when I was a kid. The people who made up the government before have all moved out to the exurban counties or farther. I mean, I know people who commute like 2 hours a day or more to get into the office, or who did, because they wanted to live out where they could have some land. And
also, in many cases, to escape the policies that they had supported.
No.
Not all cases, but in many cases, we see that in rural areas all the time.
You're seeing that now. Before it was to get land, and because they didn't want to have to live with those policies, because so many people immigrated into the suburbs from all over that just the composition of the suburbs changed. But now in the federal workforce, you're seeing a change of nationality, and with that comes change in culture, right? And underlying culture and assumptions. And I don't see where people are explicitly learning how to be American citizens anymore, or what it means to be part of the great Lockean experiment, or what a social contract is. And that part's kind of creepy. My friends in Fairfax County schools, where I grew up, don't really learn the history of Fairfax County anymore. And hey, guys, George Washington came from Fairfax County, father of the nation. Several of the signers of the Declaration of Independence came from Fairfax County, like Horse Harry Lee. George Mason not just designed the Revolutionary War uniforms, not just designed the Virginia flag. He wrote the Fairfax County Resolves, which was Fairfax County's petition to the Crown. Hey, please hear us. There's some trouble here. Please fix it. And when that didn't work, he also went on to write the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was the very first written Bill of Rights in all of the history of humans. Not insignificant. And kids in Fairfax County aren't really learning about that anymore because, oh my God, he was a slaveholder.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of creepy because the complexity of that story is going away, right? And it's like everything's year zero again. And it's starting from the cities. You're right.
It generally does. I grew up in Manhattan, the largest population city in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very small, very densely populated city, small square mileage wise. And so I grew up with that, the government's job is to take care of us attitude. I was drowned in it, and somehow I apparently had some form of histamine response to it because it didn't take.
I was about to ask, how did you get fixed?
Okay, how are we using that term?
Not in the veterinary sense.
Okay. Honestly, I don't know. I think that was my rebelling, perhaps. But I've also always been a fan of history.
That'll fix you in a hurry.
And I had some very good history and social studies teacher in my early years. And of course, the study of history is the study of conflict.
There's an economist at UCLA, the late Jack Hirschleifer, who wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Force, all about conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And the first line of it is, all exchange takes place in the shadow of conflict.
Well,
and considering that we can view this interaction as an exchange, it really means all interaction does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And peace is only the theoretical concept for the space in between wars.
Double emphasis on theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
And von Clausewitz said that war is diplomacy by other means.
Yes.
Yep. And he was not wrong.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that any time two people have, or any group of people have any kind of difference in preference or opinion, you're somewhere on the conflict spectrum. And it used to be that we learned through all the civil society organizations we used to grow up with here, we learned this very rich and robust set of skills for managing that. And we had lots of institutions to move through. And all of that's been flattened, and a lot of that social capital has disappeared. So, we're not getting those skills. Everybody's thinking, we have to fight it out through the government. And we have this sort happening where people are moving closer now to people who think like them, but the differences in opinions are getting darker because we're close to that 50-50 split between people who believe one way or another. And maybe we're in the middle of a big shift, so that's why we're seeing more conflict. But it's definitely playing out through the bureaucracy, and it's playing out through the courts, and it's getting a lot more acrimonious and polarized, which oddly enough makes the Second Amendment even more important, doesn't it?
Yes. And as well as all of the other rights.
Right. How are you going to successfully express a minority opinion? That's what a public choice economist would say. How are you going to be secure and free from having somebody else dominate you if you don't have the ability to employ sufficient force to, when push comes to shove, when things matter, to actually protect your boundaries and your life and your home and just the notion of your personhood itself?
Yeah, it's honestly something I've tried to explain to members of my own family for a good chunk of my life. Like my quote about never again being a catchy slogan without the ability and determination. And part of that ability is having the proper tools.
Exactly. Go ask Khmer what's left of them.
Or the Montagnards.
Oh, yeah. Those people have suffered.
And a good part of their suffering was trusting the Americans, unfortunately.
Yes. We suffer from short attention span. Ask the Afghans, right? So I don't even know where to go with this, because I don't think I have the ability to say anything even remotely polite.
So when I say who, I'm not being joking. I literally didn't understand what you said.
Do you remember the killing fields?
I mean, not personally, but I know what you're talking about. In Cambodia.
Right. The Khmer Rouge took over.
Right.
They declared it year zero.
Right.
Well, that means that anybody who could remember anything before year zero had to be eliminated.
They were a threat. If you wore glasses, if you were educated,
mm-hmm.
if you had certain types of skills.
Being able to be armed is this last bastion a state has to overcome, a regime has to overcome before they can become able to start taking away the rights of any disliked minority. History tells us how that ends a lot, right?
Just, read the history of Judaism for a bunch of examples.
Yeah, or Richard Rubinstein's The Cunning of History. He talked a 4-step process by which the Jews were stripped, were made into an other, were dehumanized, were stripped of their rights, first in polite society and then in law. And when they got to the point where they could take away the guns of Jews, that's when the killing began.
Or for that matter, any possessions.
Or, yes.
Guns were just one example of that.
Well, I mean, as another...
But again, that's something that's repeated throughout history.
I mean, as another example, we were talking at one point about the body armor ban, and I believe it was Hopalong Ginsburg, and I'm probably going to butcher the quote. David, if you could pull it out of your sleeve, that would be great, but it boiled down to, body armor is meant to keep you alive against threats, and if the government wants to take it away from you, that's a really good indication that they would like the ability to kill you at their convenience, and they don't like the fact that you could make it harder for them.
I'm looking for it right now.
I wouldn't know where to look. That's why I asked.
Like, I have a copy of it in a folder. I just need to remember what I called
I figured you did.
One of the
Here we
problems... Oh, go ahead.
There it is. Laws that restrict the wearing of body armor are saying someday the state might want to kill you, and we can't have you making it harder for them.
Basically what I said, just phrased better.
Well, he does have a knack.
He does. Okay, so I've noticed that Oddball is writing something else, and so let's...
Adding more to the show notes?
Yeah. So let's close this out because Oddball has things to say about the Avidity Arms PD-10.
Yeah. So I can't remember if we talked about this a while ago, but the Avidity Arms PD-10, which many folks might know as that pistol that Rob Pincus debuted or showed off back in like 2017, is finally coming out, and it is they've announced that it's on the market now, which of course, it being the gun industry does one of those things that I am deeply frustrated over, and I know David doubly so, of a gun manufacturer will announce a new gun and say it's on sale now, and nobody
6 months
actually...
to a year later.
Yeah. But the reviewers are getting their hands on them now, and all the reviews seem to be very positive. And if you're unaware of what this gun is, it is a very thin single stack 9mm, basically a full size 9mm pistol.
But don't we have that with the Glock 43?
That's...
And the car and the 9mm 1911s, to the point that the 1911 that this gun actually takes 1911 magazines. But is striker fired.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's very Glock-like.
So, and like I said, from everything I've heard, it is very comfortable and very to shoot and very accurate. And the theory with the single stack 9mm magazine is that that way you can have a full size gun that you get a full grip on, but still it is thin and easy to conceal. And when Rob Pincus showed it off back in 2017, that gun was sort of that type of gun was sort of the new hotness that people were looking at. And then SIG brought out the P365.
And that changed the landscape dramatically.
Yes. But I know a number of people that ding the 365 because, well, my pinky is hanging off. Well, yeah, but it's a pocket pistol. What do you want?
And if it really bothers you, get the X or the XL.
And one thing that I do think is going to hurt them is their MSRP is $600. And currently the one place that I can find claiming that it's in stock is guns.com that's selling it for almost $700.
Yeah.
And that
Which is partially a sign of the times.
True. But that's also, I think that's also a lot for an unproven single stack 9mm pistol.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago when the MSRP would be X, and then your friendly local gun store would have it for X minus like $50 or $100.
Oh, and that's still very much the case. And I'm sure that once there is a comfortable amount of guns in the supply chain and actually showing up on shelves, that will quickly become the case with this gun as well. I'm sure that guns.com is putting it at that price point because, one, they don't have a lot of them, and two,
it's a novelty.
Getting those early adopters. And I have to say, it looks like an interesting gun. I handled it, the one that he had back when at NRA Con, and it felt comfortable. Obviously, I didn't shoot it because they tend to frown upon those sorts of things on the vendor floor at NRAM.
Poop.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and Avity Arms is a brand new company, which also adds to the price. They're trying to get off the ground. But yeah, and there's the novelty of just it's a new gun that's actually finally getting out. That's all. And since we were a gun-related podcast, I thought we should talk about some hardware.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I was looking at the article that you linked, and like I said, it's very Glock-like, and that's fine. But one thing I'm a little squicky about is the view from the rear of the slide. There are some major openings where the slide and the frame meet up. Yeah,
and I've seen some folks kind of poke fun at it with the amount of space between the base of their magazine and the grip. Like I said, it uses a 1911 9mm magazine, so you're always going to get differences with base plates. But with the magazine that comes with the gun, you'd think they'd try to make it up a little bit better than that.
That doesn't bother me so much. It's the large openings where the frame meets the slide at the rear. Because if you're carrying that gun and you're carrying it concealed, that's going to fill up with lint fairly quickly.
True. That's fair.
And there's a reason that basically every striker-fired pistol tries to match up the frame and the slide at the rear to minimize that, and I don't know why they didn't.
But do you know who isn't full of lint?
Our listeners?
Our listeners. I'd like to give thanks to each and every one of our listeners, and a very special thanks to all of our supporters on Patreon. To become a Patreon patron, go to patreon.com/Assorted Calibers Podcast to sign up. Patrons get an early release of the podcast, plus bonus content like our hilarious blooper reels, ACP film tracks, and the ACP Mag Dump.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends both online and off. Unless you don't like it, then share it with your enemies.
Good boy, David. I didn't even have to prompt you. You just did that.
Yay, I did good.
You did. So
I get a cookie.
Okay. So you can get more from me at linktree/Erin Paulette. That's linktree.ee/Erin Paulette, all one word. Oddball, where can we get more of you?
Well, you can get more of me right here, and I've got a couple segments brewing, and definitely the patrons know me from the bonus material, the movie tracks and mag dumps. And I'm also a regular guest at Handgun Radio and on the Facebook ACP page. I have a blog at gunscarstech.com.
I mean, you have a blog, but when was the last time you updated it?
I need to do that. And I've got a couple things that I need to post. And because she will hit me with a frying pan if I don't say so, my lovely wife, Panya, which everybody's heard of, and she's done a couple story times with Panya on here, has started her own podcast called Meowcore. So if you like metal, heavy metal, or want to know more about heavy metal and want to hear a couple folks talking about cats and books and heavy metal, check out their podcast. I believe they just released their 4th episode.
Mm-hmm. So someone who very regularly writes for a blog, good boy, is David.
Hello.
David, where can we find more from you?
Well, in addition to here, I'm an irregular guest on Handgun Radio. And I'm also a contributor at Blue Collar Prepping, which can be found at bluecollarprepping.blogspot.com. My latest post, as of this recording, should be going up, I guess, the next day or so, and is on a very special type of cake. I'm also a published author, and books with my stories can be found on Amazon under the names Brenna Bach and David Bach.
And Connie, thank you so much for joining us. You really elevate the conversation. Is there any place people can find you?
I tweet at Mama Imp. That's MAMAIMP. Not as active on it as I want to be. And right now, that's the main place where people can find me.
All right. Well, all that's left...
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And of course, thanks to Nate Spencer for our music. Okay, you degenerates. Does someone else want to try to take my spot for the stinger, or is it once again up to me? Okay, go for it.
I can.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Erin was present for this roundtable, but Weird wasn't. Their presence is assorted, and so is our podcast.
Say goodnight, David.
Good night, David.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, folks.